Hey there! Tonight we're going on a journey through one of the richest fantasy worlds ever created. We're going to explore the complete lore of The Witcher, from the very beginning of time to the epic struggles of Geralt, Ciri and Yennefer. This is a world of ancient magic, horrifying monsters, political intrigue and tragic love stories that span generations. Before we begin, I want to thank my subscribers for completing 1,000 subscribers. This milestone means so much to me, and I couldn't have reached it without each and every one of you. Your support keeps this channel going, and I'm truly grateful to have such an amazing community gathered around these nighttime stories. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment and let me know what corner of the world you're settling in from. Whether you're in a cozy bedroom in London, a quiet apartment in Tokyo, or somewhere under the stars in the countryside, it's always wonderful knowing who else is out there, drifting off to these tales of swords and sorcery. Now get comfortable, adjust your pillow. Let the weight of the day fall away from your shoulders, because the story we're about to tell spans thousands of years, crosses multiple dimensions, and weaves together the fates of elves, dwarves, humans, and creatures beyond imagination. This is the complete history of the Witcher universe, and by the time our journey ends, you'll understand every corner of this dark, beautiful, and utterly compelling world. The Witcher is a world created by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski, whose short stories and novels gave birth to one of the most beloved fantasy franchises in modern history. Through the games developed by CD Projekt Red and the Netflix television series, millions of people have come to love this world. But tonight, we're going beyond the adventures of Geralt. We're going to the very foundations of creation itself. So close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze rest somewhere comfortable. Let my voice carry you through the mists of time, back to an age before humans walked the continent, before monsters lurked in every shadow, before there were witches to hunt them. Let's begin at the very beginning. Chapter 1. The Elder Races and the Old World. Long, long ago, before the age of humans, before the cataclysm that would reshape everything, the world that would one day be called the continent existed in a state of primordial peace. This was a world of ancient forests and crystalline streams, of mountains that touched the clouds and valleys that had never known the footfall of mankind. And in this world, there lived the Elder Races, beings of such antiquity that their origins are lost even to their own memories. The Gnomes were the first. They are believed to be the only truly indigenous sentient species on the continent, the only people who can genuinely claim this world as their original home. Picture them as they were in those earliest days, small, clever beings with an affinity for the earth itself. They built their settlements in harmony with the land, cultivating herbs and developing a deep understanding of the natural world. The Gnomes lived quietly for ages beyond counting, their civilization developing in ways that left few marks upon the world but ran deep nonetheless. Then, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years before the great cataclysm that would change everything, the Dwarves arrived. Where did they come from? The histories do not say for certain. Perhaps from another realm entirely, crossing through means now forgotten. What we know is that they came without violence, without the intention of conquest. The Dwarves and Gnomes found common ground, recognizing in each other a shared love for the earth, for craft, for the slow and steady work of building something meant to endure. Together these two elder races flourished. They established great cities, most notably Tir Tochair and the mighty stronghold of Mahakam, which would survive through the ages to come, standing as one of the few bastions and legacies of the ancient world. In Mahakam's deep halls and mountain passages, dwarven smiths would forge weapons and armour of legendary quality, their techniques passed down through countless generations. But the gnomes and dwarves were not destined to remain alone on the continent. The elves came next, arriving on what the old tales call white ships, vessels of elegance and magic that carried them across what? The sea? The space between worlds? The elves themselves speak of their arrival in terms that suggest something more than simple maritime travel. They possessed, in those days, the ability to move between worlds, to traverse the spaces that separated different realities. These elves, who would later be called the Ensader to distinguish them from their cousins who would depart for other realms, found the continent to their liking. They built magnificent cities of their own, structures of breathtaking beauty that incorporated living trees and flowing water into their very architecture. Elven civilization reached heights of culture and sophistication that would never be equalled by those who came after. They developed magic to levels of mastery that seemed godlike to other races. They created art that moved the soul to tears. They lived for centuries, accumulating wisdom and knowledge across lifespans that stretched beyond human comprehension. The relationships between these elder races were complex but generally peaceful. There was competition, certainly. There were disputes over territory and resources, but there was also trade, cultural exchange, and a recognition that the world was vast enough for all of them. The gnomes continued their quiet ways, the dwarves delved ever deeper into the mountains, and the elves spread across the surface world, their cities becoming centres of learning and beauty. This was the world before the fall. This was the age of innocence, if such a term can be applied to any age. The elder races had their conflicts and their failings, but they had not yet learned the full meaning of catastrophe. They had not yet experienced the arrival of true darkness. Other races existed in this time as well, though their histories are less well preserved. The Vran, the Werebubs, halflings whose origins remain mysterious, and others whose names have been lost to time. The world was populated by thinking beings of many kinds, each finding their place in the great web of existence. Magic existed, though its nature in this pre-cataclysmic world was different from what it would become. The elves and others could work wonders, but the raw, chaotic power that would later define sorcery had not yet fully manifested, and so the millennia passed. Civilizations rose and fell, but always within the context of a world that remained fundamentally stable, fundamentally comprehensible. The elder races looked upon their world and saw a future stretching endlessly before them, a continuation of all they had built and all they hoped to achieve. They had no way of knowing what was coming. No prophecy could have prepared them. No magic could have prevented it. The conjunction of the spheres was approaching, and when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 2: The Conjunction of the Spheres. 1500 years before the time of Geralt of Rivia, approximately 500 years before the resurrection event that divides the continent's calendar into before and after, the universe itself seemed to convulse. Multiple realities, multiple dimensions, multiple spheres of existence that had always remained separate suddenly crashed into one another like waves colliding in a storm-tossed sea. This was the conjunction of the spheres, and it was nothing less than the remaking of reality itself. Imagine, if you can, the fabric of existence tearing like cloth. Rifts opened across the world, portals to places that should never have been connected. Through these rifts came things, beings, entities that had no place in this reality. Monsters poured through, creatures of nightmare that had evolved in worlds of pure horror, predators whose very existence was antithetical to anything the elder races had ever encountered. Ghouls came through, corpse-eating abominations that would haunt graveyards and battlefields for all time to come. Graviers followed, larger and more terrible versions of the same nightmare. Vampires of various kinds crossed over, from the lesser varieties to the higher vampires who possessed intelligence, culture, and powers that made them nearly impossible to destroy. Drowners appeared in every body of water, waiting to pull the unwary to watery depths. Wraiths and spectres, creatures of pure malevolent spirit, manifested wherever trauma and tragedy had occurred. The list goes on and on. Griffins and cockatrices, werewolves and strigae, foglets and fiends, leshens and night wraiths. The conjunction dumped an entire ecosystem of horrors onto a world completely unprepared for them. These creatures had no natural place in the continent's ecology. They were invasive species of the most terrible kind, predators without predators, monsters without any natural checks on their populations. But the monsters were not the only things to cross through the rifts. Something else came as well, something that would prove even more transformative in the long run. Magic itself, or at least a particular form of it, entered the world. The elves called it chaos, and it was raw, primordial power that could be harnessed by those with the talent and training to do so. Before the conjunction, magic had existed in more subtle forms. After the conjunction, it became a force that could reshape reality, summon fire from nothing, and bend the minds of others to one's will. And there was one more thing that came through the conjunction, perhaps the most significant of all. Humans arrived on the continent. According to elven lore, humans came from a world that had been destroyed, refugees fleeing a catastrophe in their own dimension. The first human peoples to arrive were the Dauk and the Wozgor. Cultures now lost to time, their descendants eventually replaced or absorbed by later waves of human migration. These first humans were, by all accounts, savage and desperate, survivors of an apocalypse who found themselves in a strange new world filled with wonders and horrors in equal measure. The elder races, reeling from the sudden invasion of monsters, now faced a new challenge. These humans were numerous, adaptable, and possessed of a fierce will to survive. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And unlike the monsters, which were simply predators following their natures, humans could plan, organize, and wage war with terrible efficiency. But at first, there was simply chaos. The conjunction had shattered the old order completely. Elven cities fell to monster attacks. Dwarven strongholds sealed their doors against the horrors outside. Gnomish communities were wiped out entirely. The world became a place of constant danger, where venturing beyond protected walls meant risking death from any of 1,000 different nightmarish creatures. It was during this time that the first human magic users emerged. Some individuals discovered they had an innate connection to the chaos that now permeated the world. With no training, no tradition to guide them, these first sorcerers and sorceresses experimented with powers they barely understood. Many died, consumed by forces beyond their control, but some survived and learned, passing their knowledge to others, founding the traditions that would eventually become the great magical academies. The conjunction lasted only a brief time in cosmic terms, but its effects were permanent. When the rifts closed and the spheres separated once more, Everything that had crossed over remained. The monsters were here to stay, the magic was here to stay, and humanity was here to stay. Perhaps most significantly for the elves, the conjunction stripped them of something precious. Before the cataclysm, the Ensaida had possessed the ability to travel between worlds, to use the gates of the worlds that allowed passage across dimensions. After the conjunction, this ability was lost. The elves were trapped on the continent, stranded alongside the humans and monsters that had invaded their world. Some elves, those who had been elsewhere when the conjunction occurred, found themselves cut off from their kin. These elves, who would come to be called the In-El or Older Folk, established themselves in another dimension entirely. Their story would eventually intertwine with that of the continent once more, in ways that would prove catastrophic, but for now they were simply gone, leaving the Ensaida alone to face the New World Order. The period immediately following the conjunction was one of survival and adaptation. Every race, every people, every individual had to find ways to cope with a world that had become infinitely more dangerous. Alliances formed and broke, territories were carved out and defended, and slowly, very slowly, the chaos began to subside into something resembling a new normal. The elves suffered, perhaps, most acutely from the change. They had been the dominant civilization on the continent, their cities gleaming monuments to millennia of accumulated culture. Now those cities became death traps, attractive targets for monster incursions. The elves were forced to abandon many of their settlements, retreating to the most defensible locations and watching helplessly as monsters nested in the ruins of their former glory. The change in magic was particularly significant for any who could wield it. Before the conjunction, magical practice had been subtle, working with forces that were already present in the world. After the conjunction, chaos itself could be tapped directly, offering power beyond anything previously imagined but at enormous risk. Untrained users could cause explosions, fires, or worse when their emotions triggered uncontrolled releases of magical energy. The need for formal magical training became literally life or death. Different cultures responded to the new monsters in different ways. Some retreated behind walls, venturing out only when necessary and learning to make their settlements as unappealing to monsters as possible. Others developed warrior traditions specifically aimed at monster hunting, though these early hunters died in enormous numbers before effective techniques were developed. Religious movements arose that promised protection through faith, while others blamed various groups for causing the catastrophe and demanded their persecution. But normality would never truly return. The world before the conjunction was gone forever. What remained was a darker place, a more dangerous place, but also a place of greater possibility. Magic could work miracles. Heroes could arise to challenge the monsters, and in the shadows the seeds of future conflicts were already being planted. Conflicts that would span centuries and shape the destiny of every creature on the continent. Chapter 3: The Rise of Humanity and the Fall of the Elder Races. The centuries following the conjunction of the spheres were marked by transformations so profound that the world itself seemed to change nature. What had been a land of ancient races and measured time became something faster, more violent, more human. And that last word is key, for it was humanity that would come to define this new age, for better and for worse. The first humans to arrive during the conjunction, those Dauk and Wasgor peoples, gradually faded from history. Whether they were absorbed into later human populations, driven to extinction, or simply lost their distinct identities over time, no one can say for certain. What we know is that sometime between 700 and 800 years after the calendar's resurrection point, a new wave of humans arrived on the continent. These were the Nordlings, the ancestors of the humans we know from Geralt's time. Unlike their predecessors, the Nordlings came in organized groups with established social structures and the will to carve out a permanent place for themselves. They were colonizers in the truest sense, viewing the continent as a land to be claimed and settled, regardless of who or what already lived there. At first, the elder races did not perceive the full threat. The Nordling seemed just another group of humans, troublesome but manageable. The elves in particular still remembered their own greatness, still believed in their own superiority. They had survived the conjunction. They had rebuilt their civilization, if not to its former heights, then at least to a level of stability. Surely these short-lived, crude creatures could not pose a serious challenge. This was perhaps the greatest miscalculation in elven history. What the elves failed to understand was the nature of humanity itself. Humans lived fast, died young, and bred prolifically. Where an elven couple might have 1 or 2 children over centuries, human families could grow by the dozens within a single generation. Human societies were chaotic, yes, but also dynamic, adaptable, and ruthless in their pursuit of survival. And humans had something the long-lived elves sometimes lacked: urgency. When you might die at any moment, you do not wait patiently for problems to resolve themselves. The Nordlings spread across the continent like a tide. They cleared forests for farmland, driving out the creatures that lived there. They dammed rivers and built mills, heedless of the effects on the landscape. They founded towns and cities, their populations growing with each passing year. And wherever they went, they pushed the elder races before them. The elves resisted, of course. There were wars, battles, massacres on both sides. But for every elf that fell, 10 humans seemed to take their place. Elven warriors might be individually superior, but they could not match the sheer numbers their enemies could field. And as time passed, human magic users grew. More skilled, human technology advanced, and human kingdoms became better organized for war. The dwarves fared somewhat better, if only because they had never been as numerous or as visible as the elves. They retreated into their mountain strongholds, particularly Mahakam, and negotiated arrangements with the human kingdoms that allowed them to maintain a degree of autonomy. The dwarves were pragmatists by nature, and they saw no profit in fighting a war they could not win. Better to find accommodation, to make themselves useful to the new order, than to be destroyed in futile resistance. The Gnomes, those original inhabitants of the continent, faded almost entirely from view. Whether they went into hiding, were absorbed into dwarven communities, or simply died out, their voices disappeared from the great conversations of history. By this time, the 4 great northern kingdoms had emerged: Temeria, Redania, Caedwyn, and Aedirn. Each had its own character, its own rulers, its own ambitions. Temeria, lying south of the Pontar River, became known for its religious devotion and political stability. Redania, to the north, developed the strongest intelligence network in the world and became a centre of trade and learning. Caedwyn, the largest of the 4 in terms of territory, was a rugged land of forests and mountains, its people hardy and independent. Aedan, positioned at a strategic crossroads, became wealthy from trade but vulnerable to attack from multiple directions. These kingdoms fought among themselves constantly. Border wars, succession disputes, economic conflicts, and personal vendettas kept the continent in a state of perpetual low-level warfare. But these human conflicts were as nothing compared to what was happening to the non-human populations. The Elves, once masters of the continent, found themselves reduced to a scattered remnant. Some lived in ghettos within human cities, tolerated but despised, forced to take the lowest and most dangerous jobs. Others retreated to the last truly elven domain, Dol Blathana, the Valley of Flowers, a reservation granted to them by human conquerors with patronizing magnanimity. Still others refused to accept subjugation and took to the forests as guerrilla fighters, bands known as the Scoia'tael or Squirrels, who waged a hopeless war against human expansion. The tragedy of the elves was made worse by their own biology. Unlike humans, elves conceived children rarely, sometimes only once in centuries. Their population could not recover from the losses they had suffered. With each generation that passed, there were fewer elves, while humans multiplied endlessly. It was a slow extinction, a demographic disaster that no amount of fighting could reverse. Similar patterns played out for other non-human races, halflings, dwarves, who chose to live in human communities, and others found themselves pushed to the margins of society. The continent was becoming a human world, and everyone else was expected to either adapt or disappear. And yet, even as humanity rose to dominance, new threats emerged. The monsters released during the conjunction had not gone away. They had bred, spread, and adapted. Every village had its tales of travellers taken by drowners, of livestock killed by griffins, of entire communities wiped out by plagues carried by monsters. The human kingdoms were powerful, yes, but they could not be everywhere at once. They could not protect every farm, every road, every wilderness shrine. It was in response to this threat that certain humans began to ask a question. What if there were warriors specifically designed to fight monsters? Not just brave soldiers, but something more. Something enhanced. Something transformed into a perfect weapon against the creatures of the night. The answer to that question would create the Witchers. Chapter 4. The Creation of the Witchers. In the early days of human dominance, when monsters still roamed freely and entire communities could vanish overnight to things that came crawling out of the darkness, desperation drove innovation. Kings and mages began to discuss what kind of warrior might be created to face threats that ordinary soldiers could not handle. The result was one of the most ambitious and morally questionable projects in human history: the creation of the Witchers. The exact origins are shrouded in mystery and deliberate secrecy. What we know is that mages and warriors came together to develop a program that would transform ordinary humans into something capable of hunting monsters. This would not be simple training, though training would be part of it. This would be fundamental alteration of the human body and mind, a process of mutation that would grant abilities beyond natural human limits. The location chosen for this work was a fortress in the mountains of Cadwyn, a stronghold that would become legendary, Caer Morhen, which in the Elder speech means the fortress of the old sea. Here, in isolated towers and secret laboratories, the mages began their experiments. At the heart of the Witcher creation process was something called the Trial of the Grasses. This was not a single trial, but a series of treatments administered over days or weeks, each more dangerous than the last. The subject, typically a young boy taken from impoverished families or orphanages, would first be given a tea of herbs designed to prepare the body for what was to come. This initial dose left the recipient immobile, their body essentially defenseless as it was open to the mutations. Then came the injections. A combination of mutagenic compounds, virus cultures, and substances derived from monster parts was introduced directly into the bloodstream. These mutagens would not simply enhance the body, they would rewrite it at the most fundamental level. Bones would strengthen, muscles would become denser and more responsive, nerves would accelerate to provide reaction times impossible for normal humans. The eyes would change, gaining the ability to see in near total darkness and to adapt instantly to changing light levels. New organs would develop, including specialized mutations that allowed witches to metabolize alchemical potions that would kill ordinary people. The process was agony beyond description. Subjects writhed in pain for days as their bodies tore themselves apart and rebuilt. Fevers spiked to deadly levels. Seizures racked limbs that no longer responded to commands, and through it all, there was nothing to do but wait and see if the body would survive. Most did not. The death rate during the trial of the grasses was catastrophic, somewhere between 60 and 70%. 7 out of 10 children who entered the trial would die screaming, their bodies unable to complete the transformation they had begun. And of those who survived, some were left damaged in ways that made them unsuitable for the Witcher life anyway. But those who emerged successful were something new under the sun. Witchers possessed strength enough to match creatures 3 times their size. They could move with speed that made them blurs to ordinary eyes. They could survive wounds that would kill any normal human, their enhanced healing allowing them to recover from injuries in days that would take others months. They were immune to most diseases and poisons. They aged slowly, potentially living for centuries, and they could consume alchemical potions, each one granting temporary abilities, each one toxic to anyone without Witcher mutations. The first Witchers were not affiliated with any particular school. They were simply monster hunters, sent out into the world to do the job they had been created for. But as time passed and the practice became more established, different schools emerged, each with its own philosophy, techniques, and traditions. The School of the Wolf, based at Kaer Morhen, became the most famous. Its witchers were known for balanced training, for combining swordsmanship with sign magic and alchemical knowledge. The Wolf School emblem, a snarling wolf's head on a medallion, would become the most recognized symbol of the Witcher profession. The School of the Cat took a different approach, emphasizing speed, agility, and stealth over direct confrontation. Cat School witches were sometimes more willing to take contracts on humans as well as monsters, which gave them a reputation that was not always savoury. The School of the Griffin, based near Kaer Seren in the Dragon Mountains, emphasized magical knowledge, producing witches who were as much mages as warriors. The School of the Bear, located on Skellige, created witches renowned for their endurance and raw strength. The School of the Viper, hidden in Nilfgaard, developed witches who excelled in poison use and subtle elimination. Training at these schools was nearly as dangerous as the mutations themselves. Young witches spent years learning swordsmanship, fighting with 2 blades, one of steel for human opponents and one of silver for monsters. They studied the bestiary, learning the weaknesses and behaviours of every creature they might encounter. They practiced sign magic, simplified spells that could be cast without lengthy rituals, Ard to push enemies away, Igni to summon fire, Yrden to trap creatures in magical fields, Quen to protect themselves with magical shields, and Axii to influence minds. The obstacle courses at Kaer Morhen became legendary. The Pendulum, a gauntlet of swinging blades and moving platforms, claimed the lives of trainees who were too slow or too careless. The forest runs taught tracking and survival. The sparring sessions with older witches left permanent scars on those lucky enough to survive them. The society that created witches had ambivalent feelings about its creations. On one hand, witches were necessary. They did work that no one else could do, clearing roads of monsters, saving villages from things that lurked in the night. They were heroes of a kind, even if their heroism came at a price measured in coin. On the other hand, witches were disturbing. Their cat-like eyes, their unsettling abilities, their reputation for emotional detachment, all of these made ordinary people uncomfortable. The rumour spread that witches had no feelings at all, that the mutations stripped away their humanity along with their vulnerability. This was not entirely true. Witches could feel, could love, could hate, could mourn. But the mutations did change their emotional responses in ways that were difficult to articulate. They became more controlled, more detached, better able to make cold calculations in moments of crisis. Whether this was a benefit or a curse depended on one's perspective. One aspect of Witcher mutation was unambiguous: sterility. The transformations that granted such power also rendered witches unable to reproduce. The schools could not grow through natural means. Every new witcher had to be created through the trials, which meant a constant need for new candidates, new children willing or forced to undergo the agonizing process. As the centuries passed, the witcher schools declined. The knowledge needed to perform the mutations was lost or destroyed. Attacks on the schools by fearful humans reduced their numbers, and as humanity became more established, as kingdoms grew stronger and monster populations declined, the need for witches seemed less urgent. By the time of Geralt of Rivia, witches were considered relics of a bygone age, respected but not wanted, needed but not loved. The attack on Kaer Morhen was perhaps the most devastating blow to the witcher profession. A mob of ordinary people, fueled by fear and hatred of the mutants who lived among them, assaulted the fortress. Many witches died, and more critically, the laboratories where the mutations were performed were destroyed. The knowledge of how to create new witches was lost, entrusted only to a handful of elderly mages who took their secrets to their graves. After the attack, Kaer Morhen fell into partial ruin. Only a skeleton crew of old witches remained, maintaining the fortress as a winter refuge and training ground for the few who survived. The School of the Wolf, once the most prominent of all witcher schools, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Other schools fared no better. The School of the Cat scattered, its members becoming mercenaries and assassins. The School of the Griffin was destroyed entirely in a cataclysm. The School of the Viper fell victim to political machinations in Nilfgaard. By Geralt's time, the number of true witches remaining on the continent could be counted on one's fingers and toes. No new witches were being made, and those who remained were aging even by their extended standards. The profession that had saved humanity from the monsters was dying out, even as the monsters themselves continued to threaten anyone who ventured beyond the walls of civilization. The creation of the Witchers was humanity's answer to the monsters of the Conjunction. It was a brutal answer, one that required the sacrifice of countless children. But in a brutal world, perhaps brutal solutions were the only ones that worked. The Witchers stood between humanity and the darkness, and for that, they were owed a debt that would never be paid. If you're enjoying this journey through the Witcher's lore, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps other people find these videos and settle in for the night. And if you want more deep dives into gaming lore, stories to fall asleep to, please consider subscribing. We have so many more tales to explore together. Now let's continue our journey through the history of the continent. Chapter 5: The Kingdoms of the North. By the time the Witcher schools had established themselves, the political landscape of the continent had taken shape. The Northern Kingdoms, as they came to be called, were a collection of realms that shared certain cultural and linguistic ties, but spent most of their energy fighting among themselves. Understanding these kingdoms is essential to understanding the world of the Witcher, for their conflicts form the backdrop against which all the great stories play out. Temeria, lying south of the Pontar River, was perhaps the most stable and prosperous of the major kingdoms. Its capital, Vizima, was a grand city whose royal palace stood as a testament to Temerian wealth and power. The Temerian coat of arms, silver lilies on a black field, was recognized throughout the continent as a symbol of a kingdom that took itself seriously. Temerians were known for their religious devotion, their elaborate court ceremonies, and their belief in their own superiority over their neighbours. During the time of the Witcher stories, Temeria was ruled by King Foltest, a capable monarch who had guided his kingdom through numerous crises. Foltest was known for his political acumen, but also for a personal scandal that would have destroyed lesser rulers: his relationship with his own sister, which produced a child. That child was cursed to become a Striga, a terrifying creature that haunted the royal palace and killed anyone who ventured near. It was Geralt of Rivia who eventually lifted the curse, saving both the princess and the king's reputation. North of the Pontar lay Redania, a kingdom that combined agricultural wealth with political cunning. Redania possessed the finest intelligence network in the world, led for many years by the legendary spy master Sigismund Dijkstra. The free city of Novigrad, technically under Redanian suzerainty, was the largest city on the continent, a bustling centre of commerce where anything could be bought or sold. The university city of Oxenfurt, also in Redanian territory, was the centre of learning for the entire north, producing scholars, mages and philosophers who shaped intellectual life. Redania's coat of arms featured a white eagle on a red field, and its politics were dominated by powerful nobles, influential sorceresses, and the eternal competition with Temeria for dominance of the north. During the events of The Witcher III, Redania was ruled by King Radovid V, called the Stern, a brilliant tactician who was also increasingly unhinged, conducting purges against mages and non-humans with fanatical zeal. Cadwyn, the largest kingdom in terms of raw territory, occupied the northeastern portion of the northern kingdoms. It was a land of vast forests, harsh winters, and independent-minded people who did not take kindly to outside interference. Kaer Morhen, the Witcher fortress, lay within Cadwyni borders, though the kingdom itself paid the School of the Wolf little attention. Cadwyn's capital was Ardcarai, and its politics were characterized by constant tension between the crown and powerful noble families. Eärden, positioned at the crossroads of several major trade routes, was wealthy but vulnerable. Its capital, Vengerberg, gave birth to one of the most powerful sorceresses in history, Yennefer, whose story we will tell later. Eärden's strategic position made it a frequent battleground during the Northern Wars, and its rulers had to be clever diplomats to maintain any independence at all. Beyond these four great kingdoms lay numerous smaller realms, each with its own character. Cintra, on the southern coast, was a proud kingdom whose fall to Nilfgaardian invasion would set in motion many of the events of the main Witcher story. Kovir and Povis, far to the north, grew wealthy from precious metal deposits and managed to remain neutral in most conflicts. The islands of Skellige, home to a proud seafaring culture that combined aspects of Norse tradition with their own unique customs, operated largely independent of mainland politics. The relationships between these kingdoms were complex and ever-changing. Alliances formed and dissolved, wars erupted over disputed borders, royal marriages, trade rights, and personal vendettas. The kings played elaborate games of diplomacy, using marriages, treaties, and assassinations as tools of policy. Mages played a particularly important role in northern politics. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers, based on the magical island of Thaned, trained young mages and assigned them to serve various kingdoms. These court mages wielded enormous influence, advising rulers on everything from military strategy to economic policy. The sorceresses in particular were known for manipulating kings to their own ends, forming their own power structures that operated parallel to official government. The Lodge of Sorceresses, a secret organization of the most powerful female mages, pursued its own agenda, which often conflicted with the interests of any particular kingdom. Members like Philippa Eilhart of Redania and Sabrina Glevisid of Cadwyn were powers unto themselves, capable of making and breaking rulers as it suited their purposes. This complex web of kingdoms, nobles, mages, and competing interests created a volatile environment where anything could happen. Heroes rose and fell, kingdoms expanded and contracted, wars devastated entire regions, only for us to recover and begin the cycle again. Into this environment came the greatest external threat the North had ever faced, the Empire of Nilfgaard. Chapter 6. The Nilfgaardian Empire. Far to the south, beyond the Amel Mountains and across lands that the northern kingdoms had never bothered to explore, there arose an empire of terrifying power and ambition. Nilfgaard, named for a small province that would eventually give its name to the entire realm, was everything the northern kingdoms were not. Unified, disciplined, and relentlessly expansionist. The history of Nilfgaard is one of constant growth. Beginning as a minor state among many, Nilfgaard gradually absorbed its neighbours through conquest, diplomacy, and economic pressure. Each absorbed territory added to its strength, providing more soldiers, more resources, more territory from which to launch the next expansion. By the time the North became aware of Nilfgaard's existence, the Empire already controlled lands vaster than all the northern kingdoms combined. The Nilfgaardian system was in many ways more advanced than anything in the North. The Empire had a professional bureaucracy, standardized laws, an economy based on gold currency, and a military tradition that emphasized discipline and tactical sophistication. Nilfgaardians looked upon the northern kingdoms with contempt, viewing them as primitive barbarians squabbling over scraps while the true civilization grew and prospered in the south. The worship of the Great Sun became the official religion of Nilfgaard, providing a unifying spiritual framework that complemented the Empire's political unity. The Emperor was more than just a ruler. He was viewed as a semi-divine figure, the embodiment of Nilfgaardian destiny. To serve the Empire was to serve something greater than oneself. The story of Emhyr var Emreis, the Emperor during the time of the Witcher stories, is one of the most remarkable in Nilfgaardian history. Born the son of Emperor Fergus var Emreis, young Emhyr saw his world destroyed when a group of aristocrats overthrew his father. The usurper, as he would be known to history, had Fergus tortured and eventually killed. But he was not content to simply eliminate the imperial line. He wanted to break it completely. A sorcerer named Brathens, serving the usurper, cursed the young Emhyr, transforming him into a hedgehog-like creature. The name Emhyr itself meant Urkion in the Nilfgaardian dialect, making the curse a cruel joke as well as a punishment. By day, Emhyr was a monster. Only at midnight did he briefly regain his human form. Released into the wilderness with dogs pursuing him, Emhyr should have died. Instead, he survived, fleeing north into the very kingdoms that would one day face his armies. Under the name Duni, Urkion of Erlenwald, he wandered the land seeking some way to break his curse. Fate, that inexorable force in the Witcher universe, brought him to Sintra. While hunting, he came upon King Ragnar, wounded and helpless. Emhyr saved the king's life, and when Ragnar asked what reward he desired, Emhyr invoked the law of surprise, the ancient tradition that demands whatever the saved man finds when he returns home that he did not expect. In this case, it was Ragnar's daughter Pavetta, for Queen Calanthe was pregnant, though no one knew it yet. Years later, Emhyr came to claim his prize. By then, Princess Pavetta had grown into a young woman, and despite the circumstances, genuine love developed between her and the cursed man. Their union, blessed by destiny, broke Emhyr's curse when Pavetta's own dormant magical abilities manifested. A witcher named Geralt of Rivia was present at their wedding feast, and when asked what reward he desired for his services, Geralt invoked the law of surprise himself, not knowing that Pavetta was already pregnant. That child would be Cirilla, called Ciri, and her story is perhaps the most important in all Witcher lore. But we will come to that later. Emhyr, now restored to human form, revealed his true identity to Pavetta. Together they made plans to return to Nilfgaard to reclaim the throne from the usurper. But somewhere along the way, those plans went horribly wrong. Pavetta died, apparently drowned at sea, though the true circumstances remain murky. Emhyr returned to Nilfgaard alone, raised an army, and overthrew the usurper in a campaign of brilliant military strategy and calculated brutality. The new emperor took a new epithet, Dithwen Adden Yncarn Aep Morvud, which translated to the white flame dancing on the barrows of his enemies. It was a name earned in blood, for Emhyr had his enemies disinterred and burned, literally dancing on their graves. Under Emhyr's rule, Nilfgaard turned its attention north. In 1263, the First Northern War began with the invasion of Cintra. Queen Calanthe, grandmother of the young Siri, threw herself from the walls of her castle rather than be captured. Nilfgaardian forces swept through the southern kingdoms, seemingly unstoppable, but at the Battle of Sodden Hill, the northern kingdoms united for the first time, with the Brotherhood of Sorcerers providing magical support. the combined armies of Temeria, Redania, Cadwyn and Aedan halted the Nilfgaardian advance. The battle was catastrophic for both sides, with over 30,000 dead, including 13 northern mages. But Nilfgaard was forced to retreat behind the Aruga River. A fragile peace followed, but Emir was patient. In 1267, the Second Northern War began with a coup against the northern mages at Thaned. Nilfgaardian agents had infiltrated the Brotherhood, and when they struck, the magical support that had saved the North in the First War was neutralized. Nilfgaard swept north again, conquering vast territories before eventually being pushed back once more. The Third Northern War, which forms the backdrop of The Witcher 3, saw Nilfgaard make its most ambitious push yet. Emir's forces conquered Temeria following King Foltest's assassination, overran much of the north, and seemed poised to finally achieve complete victory. Only Redania, under the increasingly unstable King Radovid, remained as a serious obstacle. Throughout all of this, Emir pursued another goal as well. He searched for his daughter, Ciri, whose elder blood made her the key to prophecies that could determine the fate of the world. His motivations were complex, a mixture of political calculation, belief in destiny, and something that might have been genuine paternal feeling. The Nilfgaardian Wars reshaped the continent in ways that would never be undone. Entire populations were displaced, ancient kingdoms were destroyed, and in the chaos monsters flourished, making the need for witches greater than ever even as their numbers continued to dwindle. Chapter 7: The Tragedy of Lara Dorren and Elder Blood. To understand why so many powerful forces pursued Ciri, why emperors and elves and beings from other dimensions all sought her, we must return to a story that began centuries before her birth. This is the tragedy of Lara Dorren, and it contains within it the seeds of everything that followed. In the centuries after the conjunction of the spheres, the elves found themselves in desperate circumstances. Their numbers dwindled with each generation. Their lands had been taken, their cities lay in ruins, and yet, among them, there were those who believed that salvation might still be possible. Elven sages, the Ensevern or Knowing Ones, conceived of an audacious plan. If the elves could not match humanity in numbers, perhaps they could produce a champion of such power that numbers would not matter. Through careful breeding over many generations, they sought to create an individual who would carry what they called Henniker, the Elder Blood. This individual would possess magical abilities beyond anything the world had ever seen, including the power to open the Ardgaith, the gates of the worlds, allowing travel between dimensions. The Elder Blood was not simply a matter of magical talent. It was a specific genetic trait, a mutation that had to be carefully nurtured and enhanced over generations. The elves tracked bloodlines meticulously, arranging marriages and births with the precision of master breeders. Each generation brought them closer to their goal. The culmination of this breeding program was Lara Dorren ep Shiardal, daughter of the elven king Oberon Murtatash. Lara was everything the sages had hoped for: beautiful, powerful, and carrying an activated elder blood gene that gave her abilities approaching those of a goddess. She was meant to be the salvation of her people, the champion who would lead the elves to victory. But Lara Dorren was also a person, with a person's capacity for love, and the person she fell in love with was Cregennan of Lod, a human mage. This was catastrophe. The Elder Blood was supposed to remain with the elves, was supposed to produce elven children who would inherit its power. By choosing a human partner, Lara threatened to dilute the bloodline that had taken centuries to create. Worse, in the eyes of many humans, she represented an unacceptable mixing of races, a violation of the natural order. The lovers faced persecution from both sides. Humans hunted them for the crime of their union. Elves considered Lara a traitor to her people. Cregennan was eventually murdered, killed by human fanatics who could not tolerate his relationship with an elf. Lara, pregnant with their child, fled through the wilderness, pursued by enemies. The tale of what happened next is told differently by humans and elves, but all versions end in tragedy. Lara gave birth during a harsh winter, alone on a frozen hillside. She used the last of her strength to protect her newborn daughter, wrapping the infant in her own body heat as she slowly froze to death. According to legend, spring came to that hillside even as winter raged elsewhere. Flowers bloomed where Lara's blood fell, particularly a pale flower called Fi'inued, which would, forever after, grow only where elder blood was spilled. And with her dying breath, Lara cursed humanity, a curse that would echo through generations. The child survived. She was found and taken in by Queen Sero of Redania, who raised her as her own daughter, giving her the name Rhiannon. The elder blood entered the human bloodline, and though it often remained dormant, occasionally it would manifest in descendants with extraordinary powers. For the elves, this was the ultimate defeat. Their champion had died, their bloodline had been lost to humans, and their hope for salvation seemed extinguished. The Enela, those elves who had been stranded in another dimension during the conjunction, were particularly devastated, for they had hoped Lara's descendants would help them regain the ability to travel between worlds. But the elder blood did not disappear. It passed from generation to generation, sometimes active, sometimes latent, always present. The mages of the northern kingdoms tracked the bloodline obsessively, though their records were incomplete. They knew the elder blood represented power beyond measure, but they did not fully understand its nature. The prophecy of Ithlin, an ancient elven seer, spoke of the elder blood in apocalyptic terms. The time of the white frost was coming, she said, a great cold that would end the world. And when it came, the child of elder blood would either save the world or destroy it. This prophecy terrified and fascinated everyone who knew of it. The bloodline passed through many families over the centuries. Eventually it reached a young princess of Cintra named Pavetta, daughter of Queen Calanthe. Pavetta's dormant elder blood activated during her wedding to the cursed Dunny, when her emotions triggered an explosive release of magical energy. And when Pavetta gave birth to her daughter Cirilla, the elder blood passed to a new generation, more potent than ever. Ciri, as she would be known, was the culmination of centuries of elven breeding, an unplanned experiment spanning generations, and the fulfillment of prophecies both hopeful and terrifying. She was the child of elder blood, the child of destiny, and the most sought-after individual on the continent. Everyone wanted her. The Nilfgaardian Empire wanted her because Emperor Emir believed her bloodline could legitimate his rule and produce heirs of unmatched power. The Elves wanted her because she represented their lost heritage, the culmination of their breeding program. The Enele wanted her because only the elder blood could reopen the gates of the worlds. Mages wanted her because her power could tip the balance in their endless political games. And pursuing her across dimensions came the Wild. Hunt spectral riders from another world whose purpose we shall soon explore. Chapter 8. Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf. In the year 1174, in the kingdom of Caedwyn, a sorceress named Vicenna gave birth to a son. She named him Geralt, and for reasons that remain unclear, she gave him up to the witches of the School of the Elf. Perhaps she knew that her son had unusual potential. Perhaps she could not care for him. Perhaps there were threats to his safety that required him to disappear. Whatever her reasons, the infant Geralt was taken to Caer Morhen, the mountain fortress where witches were made. There he would spend his childhood in training and eventually undergo the trial of the grasses that would transform him into something more than human. Geralt proved exceptional even among witches. His body responded to the mutations better than perhaps any subject before or since. Where other candidates barely survived the standard treatments, Geralt showed such unusual tolerance that the mages decided to subject him to additional experimental procedures. These extra mutations pushed him further than any witcher had been pushed before. The result was visible in his appearance. The excess of mutagen stripped all pigment from his hair, leaving it pure white. His eyes, already cat-like as all witches' eyes were, became even more distinctive. His physical abilities exceeded those of typical witches by a significant margin, and perhaps most significantly, his emotional responses were affected in ways that set him apart. Geralt became known as the White Wolf, both for his appearance and for the wolf medallion he wore as a symbol of his school. He trained under the old witcher Vesemir, who became the closest thing to a father he would ever know. He befriended other young witches, particularly Eskel, who became like a brother to him, and Lambert, whose abrasive personality masked a loyal heart. The training was brutal, the conditions harsh, but Geralt survived it all. He mastered the two swords that every witcher carried, steel for creatures of flesh, silver for those vulnerable to the precious metal. He learned to brew potions that enhanced his abilities at the cost of poisoning any normal human who consumed them. He practiced the signs, simple spells that could mean the difference between life and death when facing monsters. When his training was complete, Geralt took to the road, a witcher seeking contracts, killing monsters for coin. He took the surname of Rivia at Vesemir's suggestion, adopting a Rivian accent to match, all to make himself seem more trustworthy to potential clients. Years later, ironically, Queen Meve of Lyria and Rivia would knight him after he fought beside her forces, making his fake title genuinely official. Geralt's early career established patterns that would define his life. He worked alone, travelling from town to town on a horse he always named Roach, regardless of the actual horse's original name. He took contracts that others refused, facing creatures that would have killed ordinary men in heartbeats. He developed a reputation for fairness and professionalism, always completing his contracts and never cheating clients. But Geralt also developed a reputation for something else: moral complexity. Unlike some witches who treated monster killing as pure business, Geralt found himself drawn into situations where right and wrong were not clearly defined. He faced choices where every option led to harm, where the monster was sometimes less monstrous than the humans who hired him. The incident at Blaviken became infamous. A sorceress named Renfrey, cursed from birth and turned toward violence by those who had wronged her, planned to slaughter innocent people to get at the mage who had destroyed her life. Geralt tried to find a peaceful solution, failed, and was forced to kill Renfrey and her band to prevent a massacre. The townsfolk, not knowing the full story, saw only a witcher who had murdered people in their marketplace. They called him the Butcher of Blaviken, a name that would haunt him for decades. This pattern of trying to do right and being punished for it would recur throughout Geralt's life. He cared about justice even when he claimed not to. He helped people even when they couldn't pay. He made enemies among the powerful by refusing to be their tool, and he developed a philosophy of refusing to choose between evils, of trying to find a third path, even when no third path seemed to exist. Two women defined the great loves of Geralt's life. The first was Yennefer of Vengerberg, whose story we will tell soon. Their relationship was stormy, passionate, and complicated by a wish Geralt made to a djinn that may or may not have bound their fates together. They separated and reunited multiple times over the years, their love somehow surviving every conflict and every betrayal. The second woman was not a lover but a daughter. When Geralt invoked the law of surprise at the wedding of Duny and Pavetta, he claimed, without knowing it, the child that would be born to them, Ciri. At first, Geralt tried to avoid this claim, uncomfortable with the responsibility of caring for a child. But destiny kept pushing Ciri toward him, and eventually he accepted her as his own. Ciri trained at Kaer Morhen, learning swordsmanship and survival from the witches. Though she never underwent the mutations that would have made her one of them, Geralt became her father in every way that mattered, teaching her, protecting her, and eventually making her the most important person in his world. The story of Geralt's adventures fills volumes. He fought monsters of every kind, from the lowliest drowner to beings of near godlike power. He navigated the political intrigues of kingdoms and empires. He loved, lost, grieved, and somehow kept going. Through it all, he remained what the Witcher mutations had made him, a killer of monsters, a man apart, the White Wolf walking his path through a world that needed him but could never fully accept him. Some of Geralt's most famous adventures became the stuff of legend. There was the time he lifted the curse on the Striga of Temeria, spending an entire night fighting off a monster that had once been a princess, refusing to kill her when killing would have been easier. There was his involvement in the affair of Renfri and the mage Stregobor, where trying to prevent greater evil led to the massacre that earned him the Butcher name. There was his encounter with the golden dragon villain Trettenmirth, one of the few times he chose not to fulfill a contract because the target proved more worthy of life than those who wanted it dead. He made friends in unlikely places, Dandelion the Bard, whose friendship lasted decades despite the poet's tendency to get them both into trouble, Zoltan Chive, a dwarf whose loyalty was exceeded only by his capacity for drink, Regis, a higher vampire who had sworn off human blood and proved one of the most philosophical minds Geralt ever encountered. These friendships sustained him through the darkest times, reminding him that even a witcher need not walk entirely alone. Geralt developed a reputation for taking on cases that other witchers refused. He hunted not just monsters, but the truth behind why monsters appeared. He investigated curses, tracking down their origins and sometimes finding ways to break them without bloodshed. He became known as someone who could be trusted to find solutions rather than simply kill problems. His philosophy evolved over time. Early in his career, he tried to maintain strict neutrality, refusing to take sides in human conflicts or make moral judgments about his clients. But this stance proved impossible to maintain. Again and again he found himself drawn into situations where neutrality meant allowing evil to triumph. He learned that refusing to choose was itself a choice, and often the worst one. By the time of the great events that would define his legacy, Geralt had become something his creators never intended. Not just a weapon, but a man with a moral compass, someone who cared about justice even when justice seemed impossible. The mutations had made him less than human in some ways, but in others, he had become more human than many of those who looked down on him. Chapter 9. Yennefer of Vengerberg. In 1173, in the capital city of Eden called Vengerberg, a girl was born with a curved spine and a jaw that did not set properly. Her name was Yennefer, and from her first moments her life was defined by cruelty. Yennefer's father hated her for her deformities, blaming them on her mother's quarter-elven blood. He beat Yennefer regularly, finding in her imperfections justification for violence. When her father eventually abandoned the family for another woman, Yennefer's mother, instead of protecting her daughter, turned her own bitterness into abuse. There was no safety for the hunchbacked child, no refuge from the world's cruelty. But Yennefer had something that those who tormented her could not see: magical potential. Like all those born with the gift, she was a source, someone capable of channeling the chaotic energies that flowed through the world since the conjunction. And one day, under pressure from bullies, that potential manifested in the most dramatic way possible. She opened a portal and teleported away. The use of magic without training left a mark that could be detected by other mages. Tisaya de Vries, rectoress of Aretusa, the most prestigious academy for female mages on the continent, came to collect the young source. The price she paid Yennefer's stepfather was 4 marks, less than half the cost of a pig. Aretusa stood on the magical island of Thaned, and it was there that Yennefer's transformation began. On her first night, overwhelmed by despair, she tried to take her own life by slitting her wrists. Tisaya saved her, not out of kindness, but because she saw potential worth preserving. The rectress became a mother figure of sorts, demanding, harsh, but ultimately invested in Yennefer's development. The training at Aretusa was rigorous, covering not just magic but politics, history, and the arts of manipulation that sorceresses use to influence those in power. But the most dramatic aspect of Aretusa training was physical transformation. According to the traditions of the Academy, sorceresses must remake themselves, achieving perfect beauty through magic. For Yennefer, this meant correcting every deformity that had defined her life. Her spine straightened, her jaw aligned properly. Every imperfection was erased and replaced with features designed to captivate. The woman who emerged from this transformation was stunning, raven-haired, violet-eyed, with a face and figure that would entrance anyone who looked upon her. But the transformation came with a price. The magical alteration of her body rendered Yennefer sterile, unable to bear children. For a woman whose early life had been defined by rejection, the knowledge that she could never create her own family became a wound that never fully healed. Yennefer became one of the most powerful sorceresses of her generation. After leaving Aretusa, she served as court mage to the King of Eden, wielding enormous influence over the kingdom's policies. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless when crossed. Her signature lilac and gooseberry perfume became famous, a calling card that announced her presence to those who knew her. Her meeting with Geralt of Rivia came when the Witcher was seeking help for his friend Dandelion, a bard whose amorous adventures had left him on the verge of death. Geralt came to Yennefer, and the attraction between them was immediate and electric. But there was more than simple chemistry at work. Geralt had captured a djinn, a powerful spirit capable of granting wishes. In the chaos that followed, he used his final wish to bind his fate to Yennefer's. The exact wording of the wish remains unknown, and its implications have been debated endlessly. Did it create the love between them, or merely strengthen what already existed? Were they together because of genuine feeling, or because of magical compulsion? Yennefer and Geralt never fully resolved this question. Their relationship was a cycle of passion and conflict, reunion and separation. They loved each other genuinely, of that there was no doubt. But they also drove each other mad, their strong personalities clashing as often as they harmonized. When Ciri entered their lives, Yennefer found something she had never expected. A daughter, if not by blood, then by choice. She trained Ciri in magic, taking over from the witchers who could not teach the girl to control her growing powers. The bond between Yennefer and Ciri became as deep as any between mother and child, transforming the sorceress in ways that nothing else had managed. During the chaos of the Thaned coup, when Nilfgaardian agents attempted to seize control of the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, Yennefer fought to protect Ciri. She was eventually captured, tortured, and believed dead for a time, but Yennefer was not easily killed. She survived, escaped, and continued her relentless quest to reunite with those she loved. Yennefer's story is one of transformation, not just physical but spiritual. The abused child became a powerful woman. The cynical manipulator became a devoted mother. The isolated individual learned to love and be loved in return. Through all her schemes and struggles, she remained true to herself, fierce, proud, and utterly unwilling to accept anything less than she deserved. Chapter 10. Ciri, Child of Destiny, Cyrilla Fiona. Ellen Rhiannon was born in 1253 during the spring celebration of Beltane to Princess Pavetta of Cintra and the man known as Duny, Urkion of Erlenwald. From the moment of her birth, she was marked by destiny for extraordinary things. Her grandmother, Queen Calanthe, called the Lioness of Cintra, was one of the most formidable rulers in the north. Calanthe doted on her granddaughter, seeing in Ciri the continuation of a royal line that stretched back generations. The young princess grew up in luxury, but also in the shadow of danger, for word of her elder blood had spread to those who understood what it meant. When Ciri was 6 years old, her parents died at sea under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was an accident. In truth, her father Emir had survived and returned to his true identity as Emperor of Nilfgaard, while her mother Pavetta had died in circumstances that remained unclear. Ciri was told her father was dead, and she grew up an orphan raised by her grandmother. The Nilfgaardian invasion of 1263 shattered the world Ciri knew. She was present in Cintra when the Empire's forces breached the walls. She saw her grandmother fling herself from the heights rather than be captured. She fled through streets filled with death, pursued by soldiers who had orders to capture her at any cost. A Nilfgaardian knight named Cahir had been charged with securing the princess. In Ciri's nightmares for years afterward, she would see his black-winged helmet and hear his voice calling her name. She escaped him through luck and the help of others, fleeing into the wilderness where she was found by refugees and eventually made her way to the country. Geralt of Rivia found her again, as destiny demanded. He had tried to avoid claiming his child of surprise, uncomfortable with the responsibility and uncertain what to do with a princess of a fallen kingdom. But when he saw her, alone and traumatized, he could not turn away. He became her protector and, in time, her father. Ciri trained at Kaer Morhen during the winter of 1264-1265, learning swordsmanship from the Witchers. She could not undergo the mutations, but she could learn their techniques. Under Geralt's guidance, she became a skilled fighter, though her small stature and lack of mutations meant she would never match a true Witcher in strength or speed. She learned to compensate with agility and technique, developing a fighting style that emphasized movement and precision over raw power. Her magical training came from Yennefer, and later from other mages. Ciri's elder blood gave her powers beyond normal sorcery. She could manipulate time and space, opening portals between locations and even between worlds. In moments of extreme emotion, her abilities could devastate entire areas. She was, potentially, one of the most powerful beings ever born. The nature of Ciri's power was unlike anything else in the world. Normal mages drew on chaos, the raw magical energy that had entered the world during the conjunction. Ciri could do this too, but her elder blood gave her access to something deeper. She could step outside of time, could perceive the flow of causality, could move through space in ways that defied conventional magical theory. Her screams, when she lost control, could shatter stone and split the earth. These abilities manifested unpredictably, especially in her youth. Moments of terror or rage would trigger uncontrolled releases of power. During one such incident at Kaer Morhen, her scream brought stones falling from the ceiling and left the Witchers shaken by what they had witnessed. Controlling these abilities became a central challenge of her training. The pursuit of Ciri by various forces shaped the central narrative of the Witcher saga. The Emperor wanted her for political and personal reasons. The Elves saw her as the culmination of their breeding program. The mages wanted to use her power, and from another dimension entirely, the Wild Hunt pursued her across worlds. Ciri's journey took her to places beyond imagination. She travelled through time and space, visiting worlds utterly unlike the continent. She spent years in Brokilon Forest among the Dryads, learning their ways. She trained at the Temple of Melitele, studying healing arts. She fell in with a gang of outlaws called the Rats, briefly living as a criminal under the name Falka. She was captured by the Aenele Elves and taken to their dimension, where King Oberon intended to make her bear his child. Through it all, she retained her essential nature, brave, stubborn, compassionate, and fiercely loyal to those she loved. Ciri would do anything for Geralt and Yennefer, who had become her true parents. She would face any danger, challenge any power to protect her family. The prophecy of Ithlin hung over her entire life. She was either the savior who would prevent the White Frost from destroying the world, or the destroyer who would bring that same frost upon all existence. The ambiguity was maddening, and different powers interpreted the prophecy in ways that served their own interests. In the end, Ciri's choices would determine not just her own fate, but the fate of the world itself. She was the child of elder blood, the child of destiny, and the resolution of her story would bring the great saga to its conclusion. Chapter 11. The Wild Hunt. In the skies above the continent, on certain cold nights when the moon hung low and the air itself seemed to freeze, people reported seeing something terrifying, a cavalcade of spectral riders galloping across the heavens. Their horses breathed frost. Their armour was black as void, shaped like skeletons to inspire maximum terror. And at their head rode a figure in a crowned helmet, the king of the wild hunt, leading his wraiths of Morhog in eternal pursuit of prey. Common folk believed the wild hunt to be supernatural harbingers of doom. When the hunt rode, war and plague soon followed. They stole souls, the stories said, carrying them away to some hell beyond mortal understanding. To see the wild hunt was to be cursed, marked for disaster. The truth was stranger than any legend. The wild hunt was not composed of spirits or demons. Its riders were the Aineli, those elves who had been stranded in another dimension when the conjunction of the spheres separated the worlds. In their home dimension, the Aineli had built a mighty civilization, slaughtering the human inhabitants they found there and engaging in endless war with the unicorns who shared their world. But the Aineli had a problem. Their society required slaves, and they had killed all the native humans. They needed to raid other worlds for fresh labourers. And so King Oberon Myrcetash created the Diarg Ruadri, the Red Riders, a cavalry unit whose purpose was to cross between dimensions and capture beings from other realities. Eredin Brack Glass was appointed to lead this force. He was a general of great skill and greater ambition, a warrior whose name even the unicorns feared. Under his command, the Red Riders developed techniques for crossing between worlds. They could not travel physically in large numbers, but they could project themselves as spectral forms, visible but not fully present. And in those spectral forms, they discovered they could terrify the populations of other worlds into submission. The people of the continent gave them a new name, the Wild Hunt. Eredin became known as the King of the Wild Hunt, though he served under Oberon for many years before claiming true kingship. The Wild Hunt raided the continent periodically for centuries, appearing during winter when the dimensional barriers seemed weakest. They took hundreds of people over the years, carrying them away to serve the Enel. Those few who escaped and returned to the continent were considered mad, their tales of another world and elven masters dismissed as delusions. Everything changed when the Wild Hunt encountered Ciri. The elder blood that Ciri carried was of immense interest to the Enel. Long ago, before the conjunction, the elves had been able to travel between worlds freely using the Ardgaith, the gates of the worlds. When the dimensions separated, they lost this ability. The elder blood was the key to regaining it. Through Ciri's power, the gates could be opened again. The Enel could travel freely once more, could escape their dying world if necessary, and their world was dying. The White Frost, a cosmic phenomenon of spreading cold that devoured all life, was approaching their dimension. Avalak, a sage who had created the Elder Blood breeding program, and Eredin disagreed violently about how to respond. Avalak wanted to use Ciri's power to stop the White Frost directly. Eredin wanted to use it to evacuate the Enel to a new world entirely. Their conflict came to a head when Ciri was brought to the Enel world. King Oberon attempted to father a child with her, hoping to produce offspring carrying the Elder Blood. But Oberon found the task impossible, his revulsion toward humans preventing him from performing his duty. Eredin provided what he claimed was an aphrodisiac, but was actually an overdose of stimulants. Oberon died, and Eredin claimed the throne. Ciri escaped with the help of a unicorn, one of those ancient enemies of the Ele who recognized in her the potential for something greater than any elf had imagined. She fled back to her own world, but the wild hunt followed. In the years that followed, Eredin's pursuit of Ciri became obsessive. He captured her loved ones to draw her out. He sent his generals, Imlerith and Caranthir, to track her across the continent. He would stop at nothing to obtain the power she represented. The final confrontation between Ciri and the Wild Hunt formed the climax of her story. With the help of Geralt, Yennefer and allies gathered across the continent and beyond, Ciri faced Eredin in battle. The fate of multiple worlds hung in the balance, for if Eredin succeeded, the Elder Blood's power would be his to command. What happened next depended on choices that could not be predicted. But one way or another, the age of the Wild Hunt would come to an end. Conclusion. Throughout our journey tonight, we have spoken of monsters in general terms, but the continent is home to such a vast variety of terrifying creatures that they deserve more attention. Understanding these monsters, their origins and their natures, is essential to understanding why witches existed and why they were so desperately needed. The creatures of the continent fall into several broad categories, each with its own characteristics and weaknesses. Necrophages are perhaps the most common monsters ordinary people encounter. These are creatures that feed on the dead, drawn to corpses and carrion wherever they can be found. Ghouls and Al-Ghouls haunt cemeteries and battlefields, their pale bodies and corpse-like faces inspiring terror in anyone who sees them. Drowners lurk in bodies of water, waiting to pull unwary travellers to their deaths. Water hags and grave hags combine the worst elements of both, intelligent enough to plan their attacks and powerful enough to slaughter whole villages. Rot fiends are particularly dangerous because they explode when near death, their bloated bodies releasing clouds of poison that can kill anyone nearby. Foglets hide in mists and marshes, using illusions to confuse their prey before striking. Garcanes and Echimaras are higher forms of necrophage, possessing greater intelligence and more devastating abilities. Vampires represent some of the most dangerous creatures on the continent. The lesser vampires, Catacans and Echimaras, are dangerous enough, but the higher vampires are nearly unstoppable. Creatures like Regis, a higher vampire who befriended Geralt, possess regenerative abilities so potent that they can recover from having their entire body destroyed given enough time. Higher vampires can only be truly killed by another higher vampire, making them effectively immortal. Bruxa and Alps are vampire subspecies that appear as beautiful women to lure in their victims. A Bruxa's scream can stun or kill, while Alps feed on the fear of their victims before draining their blood. Spectres and wraiths are the spirits of those who died with unfinished business, unable to move on to whatever afterlife awaits. Night wraiths appear only after dark, their pale forms dangerous to anyone who ventures out at night. Noon wraiths are their daylight counterparts, spirits of women who died tragically and now haunt sunny fields and meadows. Penitents, plague maidens, and other spectral forms each represent different types of unresolved death and grief. Cursed creatures were once humans or animals transformed by dark magic. Werewolves are among the most famous, humans who shift into beast form under the full moon or in moments of anger. Strigae are cursed humans transformed into vampiric monsters, like the Princess of Temeria that Geralt freed from her curse. Botchlings are the spirits of unwanted children, while lubberkins are the blessed forms that botchlings can become if properly handled. Relicts are ancient creatures that predate human dominance, beings of nature, magic, and primal power. Leshens are forest spirits. Trees come to life with the malevolence of the wild, commanding wolves and crows as their servants. Fiends are massive creatures with third eyes that can induce hypnotic terror. Chorts and cyclopes, though rare, are devastatingly powerful when encountered. Draconids include griffins, cockatrices, basilisks, wyverns, and true dragons. Each requires specific tactics to defeat, and many have killed unprepared witches who underestimated their power. Insectoids like Endragus and Kikimors form hive societies in the wilderness. Their queens protected by warriors and workers that attack anything that threatens the colony. Arachnomorphs, giant spiders and their variants, spin webs that can trap even armoured knights. Ogroids such as trolls, neckers, and ice giants represent yet another category of threat. Rock trolls are sometimes intelligent enough to bargain with, while neckers attack in swarms that can overwhelm even experienced fighters. Each of these creatures requires specific knowledge to defeat effectively. The oils that witches apply to their blades, the potions they consume before battle, the signs they cast, all are tailored to exploit specific weaknesses. Silver works against many supernatural creatures. Spectre oil helps against wraiths. Various bombs can expose foglets or strip vampires of their regeneration. The Witcher's bestiary, the accumulated knowledge of centuries of monster hunting, was perhaps their most valuable possession. It told them where to find each creature, how to track it, and most importantly, how to kill it without being killed in the process. Without the witches, humanity would have been overwhelmed by the monsters long ago. With them, survival was possible, if never certain. And so we come to the end of our journey through the world of The Witcher. We have travelled from the dawn of time when only the Gnomes inhabited the continent, through the coming of the Dwarves and Elves, to the catastrophe of the conjunction that changed everything. We have seen humanity rise from desperate refugees to masters of a world that was never truly theirs. We have witnessed the creation of the witches, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the eternal struggle between those who would save the world and those who would burn it for their own ends. We have met Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf, a man created to be a weapon, but who became so much more. We have known Yennefer of Vengerberg, whose transformation from abused child to powerful sorceress shows that no one is bound by their origins, and we have followed Ciri, the child of destiny, whose choices would determine the fate of worlds. The Witcher universe is remarkable for its moral complexity. There are no simple heroes or villains, no easy answers to the questions it poses. The elves who fight for their survival are also capable of terrible atrocities. The humans who built civilization on the continent did so by dispossessing those who were there before them. Even the monsters, those creatures that witches are made to kill, are often simply predators following their nature, no more evil than wolves or bears. This complexity extends to the magic of the world. The chaos that powers sorcery is neither good nor evil, it simply is. What matters is how it is used, and by whom and for what purpose. The same power that can heal can also destroy. The same knowledge that protects can also corrupt. Every gift comes with a price, and every choice has consequences that ripple outward in ways that cannot be predicted. The story of The Witcher is ultimately about more than swords and sorcery. It's about what it means to be human in a world that often seems inhuman. It's about the choices we make when there are no good options. It's about love that survives despite every obstacle, and hate that destroys those who hold on to it. It's about the monsters that wear human faces and the humanity that sometimes lurks behind monstrous ones. Geralt once said that evil is evil, and that calling it lesser or greater is simply a way of rationalizing. But he also spent his entire life trying to do good in a world that made goodness difficult. That tension between cynicism and hope, between isolation and connection, between the monster and the man, is what makes The Witcher so compelling. The world that Andrzej Sapkowski created, and that CD Projekt Red and Netflix have expanded, continues to captivate audiences because it feels real. Not literally real, of course, but emotionally true. The struggles of its characters, the complexity of its politics, the weight of its history, all of these resonate because they reflect aspects of our own world, our own struggles, our own attempts to find meaning in a universe that often seems indifferent to our hopes. I hope this journey has given you deeper appreciation for this world, its history, and its characters. Whether you know The Witcher from the books, the games, or the television series, there is always more to discover, more connections to make, more depths to explore. If you've enjoyed tonight's story, I'd really appreciate if you could hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more tales to tell, so many more worlds to explore together. Until next time, rest well and remember, sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones who look just like us. Sweet dreams.